afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Susan Kelly, President of the City Club. Welcome to another special program, this time focusing on the state of our region with newly elected President of Metro Council, David Bragdon. But first, I want to make note of this difficult week for us nationally and internationally, and I'm sure that all of you will join me in wishing our troops a safe and healthy return to their homes and to their families. On Friday, March 28th, join us for another State of program as we focus on the state of the Port of Portland with Executive Director Bill Wyatt, and that is here at the Multnomah Athletic Club. The club's annual membership drive is well underway, and I was just speaking to a few potential candidates out there, and you know who you are. We're adding new members each week toward our goal of 100, and there's membership information on your tables or at the door. Please sign up today. Our board host is Marcus Simantel, and he is on the Board of Governors and will ask the first question. After Marcus is finished, please be prepared with your questions and be at the microphone to ask so that we can have as many questions as possible for our guest speaker. And please keep your question a question and keep it to 30 seconds or less. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from Kaiser Permanente, Nike, and Washington Mutual, and we thank them for their support. David Bragdon is the new Council President of Metro, the first President of the Metro Council, and has only been there since January 6th, so it's a few weeks back. David's goals for 2003 include increased efficiency and cost savings in Metro operations, development of a second open space acquisition measure for voter consideration, work on development of regional economic strategy, and identification of the land necessary for development of new jobs in our region. David's been elected to the Metro Council, was first elected to the Metro Council in 1998, and he served 2 consecutive years as its presiding officer. While on the council, David was part of the council's efforts that included expanding both the Oregon Convention Center and the Expo Center with a property tax increase, without a property tax increase. That was a big one. I'm sorry. Successfully completed the 5-year review and expansion of the region's urban growth boundary and directed an open space acquisition program that purchased nearly 2,000 more acres for the public than promised in that actual bond measure, which was in 1995. And I want to hear more about that. That's a good deal for us voters. And they negotiated a new solid waste disposal contract that reduced garbage rates for the region. Prior to being elected to the Metro Council, David spent much of his career with work including companies like Nike, Lasco Shipping, and Evergreen Airlines. He has spent 5 years as marketing manager of the Port of Portland, and even for a period of time as a Metro Councilor, he was a taxi cab driver here in Portland. David grew up in Portland and graduated from Catlin Gable High School, and he graduated from Harvard in 1982 with an honors degree in government. He lives in Southeast Portland, and his hobbies include hiking, running, and yoga. Please welcome our Metro Council President, David Bragdon.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you everybody for being here. I appreciate at a time like this that you would spend some time thinking about the region and some issues close to home. I recognize there's a lot going on in the world. Coincidentally, we had 2 major accomplishments, probably two of the most significant accomplishments of the recent past at Metro just in the past 2 days. And understandably, we did not get much press coverage about that. It was crowded out by other events, understandably, but I'd like to share some of that information with you today. So even while our attention is on other parts of the globe, some of these issues close to home are important. I know we are all more concerned about why Oregon is not doing a better job keeping children in the classroom, probably more interested in that than in whether Metro is doing a good job keeping penguins in the zoo. But times like this, questions like livability, transportation planning, they're not just intellectual niceties, they're not just luxuries, they are things that we need to spend some time on. This is especially true when you look at what's happened in Oregon over the past 5 months or so. Thanks to our lagging economy and paralyzed statewide political system and the budget crisis that was the consequence of that, we've become the punchline in a national joke in many ways. That's personally galling to me because I remember a time not very long ago when we were the shining example of civic engagement for all around the country. Back in my office, I have a file folder that's bursting at the seams with stories about this region of the country. Whether it's a newspaper story from Indianapolis that talks about how decisions we made 25 years ago are playing out today in our vibrant neighborhoods, or an article from a Philadelphia business magazine about Oregon's high-tech wins. We were the darlings. We had a good run as darlings of the national press. But no more. We still get national press. That is true. We still get national press, but now we're being used as an example of what not to do. We've fallen farther and faster than any of us would have thought possible a short time ago. At the same time, I would wager that the people in this room, and I know that the people that I work with at Metro, believe the things that I believe. And one of those things is that no matter how troubling things get, in different hotspots around the globe, or in Salem, for that matter, or on Wall Street, regardless of all of that, we never lose our faith in this place that we have here, this kind of quirky corner of the nation. We still believe in that. And all it takes is one morning, brilliant morning, where you see Mount Hood on the skyline, and you start to remember how lucky we are to live here, that this is home, and that's what it's about. It's a beautiful, promising place, geography and geology that we call, and I find this really unpoetic, the Metro region. I think it needs a more poetic name. So if you can think about that, meantime, think about it as our home. Forest trails, interstate highways, shopping malls, soccer fields, coffee shops, and coffee shops, cul-de-sacs and condominiums, shopping malls, and Main Street. It's all home. And at a time like this, when parents have to go out in the streets to secure the funding for their children's schools, or while we're watching scenes of a distant desert on CNN, it really is important to take comfort in our families and in this home. So I think this actually is the right time to be talking about these issues, talking about this region, talking about the things that count right here at home. Now, the lens that I look at this region is, of course, Metro, an agency which also needs a more poetic name, in my opinion. But I've never been more proud to be associated with Metro than I am today, and the things that we're undertaking in the near future. Because I've also never been more confident that this agency is poised to really build on some past accomplishments, which are tremendous, but to fulfill more of those promises, the promises that were made when Metro was created. We are the only elected regional government in the nation, created from a vision that says that the arbitrary jurisdictional lines that were drawn in the 19th century are really not particularly relevant to solving the problems of the 21st century. And today, Metro is itself entering a new era. We're putting our internal house in order, healing an agency that used to be the proverbial house divided against itself. Because in the not too distant past, Metro was often caught in its own self-imposed chokehold of ineffectiveness, because the elected council was often at odds with an elected executive. And just over 2 months ago, that changed. And it changed 2 months ago, actually, because of something that happened 2 years ago. And the reason it changed is because there was a politician who did something unique, and he's in the room here today. He proposed the abolition of his own job. And so, before I talk about how Metro is well positioned for the future, I want to acknowledge one of the reasons that it is so positioned is that Mike Burton had the vision to propose the charter amendment that created this new structure, and I'd like to ask Mike to stand and be acknowledged for that. And while I want to acknowledge him for that proposal and the change in structure, I would also like to have your applause for the other accomplishments during his 8 times as Metro's executive officer, the other contributions that he made during that time as well. Due to his charter amendment proposal, which the council referred and which the voters approved in 2000, for the first time now, we have a regionally elected official, and now that would be me now, sitting on the Metro Council as part of the mix with the other 6 councilors. And for the first time, the council has hired a professional administrator to manage the agency and be accountable for the results. Now, with the addition this January of Councilor Brian Newman, who joined the council, the current Metro Council, Rod Park, Susan McLean, Rod Monroe, Carl Hostica, and Rex Burkholder, is the strongest Metro Council that there has ever been. And their energy, their commitment, their skills are really unmatched in the history of the agency. Most of them are here, and I'd like to have them stand and be acknowledged. Now, this is the team that I get to go to work with, and combine this group with the employees at Metro, that really is an exciting place to go to work these days. It's really an honor to be with them. And the results are already starting to sink in with the organization. Because while the council is now able to focus on policy, which is what we're able to do, a professional administrator, and it's been Interim Chief Operating Officer Mark Williams, has helped me to write the budget that I'll propose to the Metro Council in the next 2 weeks. And I want to thank Mark for his skill and insight, because we could not have crafted this budget, we could not have set Metro on its new path, financially sustainable path, without Mark. So thank you, Mark, for all of that. Now, my proposed budget is going to show that business as usual will not fly at Metro. Because until the recent past, Metro had been draining its reserve funds through some deficit spending, and we'd allowed our overhead costs to escalate uncontrollably. If the council adopts the budget that I'll propose, those practices will end immediately. Now, we can't control all of our overhead costs. The liability insurance on places like the convention center have escalated tremendously. Public buildings are bearing a very high liability. We can't control that. We can't control the PERS situation. We hope people in Salem will help to do that. But we can control some things that are within our control, and we're going to have to, as our revenues stay flat, because the alternative is not very pretty. If we'd stuck with business as usual plan and the trends that we had, the operating reserves of the regional parks and green spaces would have run out in 2 years. The operating reserves at Metro's Oregon Zoo would have been exhausted a year after that. And I can't continue to jeopardize those valuable programs by perpetuating undisciplined financial practices. The budget that I'm going to submit in 2 weeks will reverse that course. Metro is going to have to and will live within its means. The new budget that I'm going to propose does rein in the spending on central services and overhead, starting by cutting the council's own staffing. We're starting with ourselves. I'll also recommend selective cuts in almost every central support service and reduce program spending, but in ways that make the lowest impact to public services. Altogether, this budget is going to cut millions from Metro's costs, but it will also protect the reserve funds of the programs that are so essential and so popular. It also ensures that Metro will not be caught vulnerable without a rainy day fund, and we won't have our bond rating eroded. Now, this budget, probably more than anything else over the time that I've been in office, proves that under our new leadership structure, Metro is maturing into a credible and responsible agency. And this budget, it's one first step toward that. We took the second step yesterday, and it's a very, very exciting one. This week, I concluded my search for a permanent Chief Operating Officer for Metro. Now, this position is going to be critical in Metro's transformation, so I was very careful about what I was looking for. I was looking for somebody who would have a very deep understanding of the managerial issues that are facing our agency, looking for somebody who could both respond to the new council, the new energy level and intellect on the council, and simultaneously lead our valuable staff, because believe me, they are a group of very talented employees, and their missions are very diverse. They range from veterinarians at the zoo to land use planners to ushers at the Performing Arts Center to hazardous waste technicians. And I needed somebody who could relate to the council and be our bridge to a talented staff like that. We did a nationwide search, and the nationwide search ended at what might seem like an unlikely place. That search ended this week, 2 days ago, in Canby, Oregon. Now, that may seem unlikely to some people. It's not unlikely to astute observers of the local public administration scene, because they know that one of the most able public administrators in this state, in fact in this country, is Clackamas County Commissioner Michael Jordan. And following his career stints in the private utility business and as a successful city manager, Mike's service on the Clackamas County Commission allowed him to grapple with the microcosm of all of the issues facing Oregon and facing Metro: urban growth pains, transportation strains, natural resource challenges, declining public budgets. On the front lines of local government in Clackamas County, Mike Jordan has seen it all, and he has dealt with all of those challenges with innovation, creativity, and real talent for personnel management. He also chaired our panel of local government advisors, the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, where, for better or worse, he had the opportunity to see Metro up close and personal. So by experience and background, Mike has really ideally manage Metro in this new era, and I think it's a real honor to Metro that somebody like him has accepted my nomination to become our first Chief Operating Officer. So I'd like to have Mike stand and be acknowledged. And Mike, I have assurances from at least a majority of the council they will vote to confirm you, but we'll work on that. Well, with a team like that, what's first on the agenda at the new and improved Metro? Well, there's the economy. Because planning for posterity really needs to also include planning to create prosperity. Creating economic wealth just by itself, well, that's not a guarantee of a healthy community where people actually want to live. I mean, Dallas and Atlanta certainly prove that. But the absence of wealth creation will guarantee that we become a place where some people aren't going to be able to live or can't live. Because livability does need to include the ability to earn a living. So our planning needs to ensure that our friends and family don't leave the state to go find a rewarding job. So we have a group of Oregon expatriates pining away for home in other states where they found opportunities that they couldn't find here. I want to make sure that our planning includes the redevelopment, the development, investments, and jobs, so that all these good intentions, maps, and drawings don't just remain nice ideals up on the shelf. So we're very committed that Metro is going to be a leader in Oregon's economic recovery. And if we perform our role well, we as an agency have 4 very important roles that we can play in that arena: bolstering tourism, expanding and preserving our supply of industrial lands, revitalizing our critical main streets, town centers around the region, and targeting transportation funding in ways that create and enhance the economic opportunity for our citizens. First, we are doing what we can to bolster tourism. After soundly managing the Oregon Convention Center for 12 successful years, Metro has now shepherded its expansion with the same sound management practices. When it opens next month, it will be the largest convention space in the Pacific Northwest. This was a $100 million expansion that was accomplished without one dime of property tax funds. It was funded by a self-imposed tax on the hospitality industry, hotel, motel industry, and the car rental industries in Multnomah County. And the expansion really justifies those industries' trust in our organization because it's being finished on time and on budget. And even more important, that will lead to the creation of 2,000 jobs in this region. And as a former cab driver, I can certainly appreciate those dollars that out-of-town visitors bring to our community and leave here because of that convention center. Metro's second major role in Oregon's economic recovery is the provision and the protection of industrial land supply for the industries of today as well as the industries of tomorrow. In December, the Metro Council voted to add nearly 3,000 acres of land to the urban growth boundary, specifically for industry. And yesterday, at Governor Kulongoski's urging, the State Land Conservation and Development Commission approved a fast-track approval of our decision and that then confirms the addition of new industrial parcels around Tualatin, Wilsonville, Gresham, Hillsborough, and elsewhere. With that action, we have now dispelled the myth that Metro and Oregon's land use planning system cannot provide land for industry. We can do it. We just did it, and it was approved yesterday. This year we need to complete that task and bring more industrial property within the urban growth boundary, so we're working closely with business now, with local governments, with citizens, to identify that land and do it in a rational and open and predictable way to make sure that we have that supply. We're also working with our local government partners to make sure that industrial land is preserved for real job-creating manufacturing and distribution plants, not having it all just gobbled up for speculative one-story office buildings or strip malls, which often waste good industrial land and also suck the life out of our traditional downtowns. We need those industrial lands for industry, not only to attract new businesses, but to keep the ones we already have. Because while there's a lot of attention paid sometimes to recruiting, the fact is 80% of new jobs are not going to be created by new companies moving into the region. They're created by homegrown companies that are succeeding and expanding here. Let me give you the example that really brought this to life for me over the last 2 or 3 years, and it's Beaverton Foods. And you use their products all the time. You may not be aware of it, nor may you be aware of their history or the fact that they almost left this state because of questions about land supply. But the company was launched in 1929 in the Great Depression, when Rose Beege started making a little extra money for her family preparing horseradish in the cellar. And once a week, she'd get up very early in the morning, and she'd take that long trip over Canyon Road where she would, to downtown Portland, where she'd sell her jars of horseradish to a modest, small proprietor of a shop in downtown Portland. I believe his name was Fred Meyer, if I'm not mistaken. But 70 years and 3 generations later, the Beege family own the largest specialty condiment company in the United States, and they are selling mustard and horseradish and other condiments all over the world, something we ought to be proud of having here. Yet, we almost lost them. Because by the mid-1990s, they were so successful, and they had outgrown their aged facility in Beaverton, and they were looking for a place to expand. And after Gene and Dominic Beege, who are Rose's son and grandson, surveyed the real estate market, they found there were very few parcels of industrial land suitable for their size of operation. And they actually began considering moving their company to another state. Luckily, at the last minute, as I understand, they were able to purchase one of the very, very few remaining large parcels of industrial land in Hillsborough and keep those jobs in this region. The lesson of this story is, while it may seem a little bit silly that Beaverton Foods is in Hillsborough, and I know my friend Tom Hughes, who's mayor of Hillsborough, ribs my friend Rob Drake, who's mayor of Beaverton, about that. The real point is that we need to keep those companies in Oregon, because it is one region and it is interdependent. And the next time that prosperous business owners like the Beeges want to expand, we want to make sure that our land use planning system is keeping them as Oregon companies, not letting them go become Kansas companies or something else. The third piece of Metro's economic strategy is to take care of the things that we have. Now, you already know we're into recycling solid waste. I think you know that. We're also encouraging the recycling of land and buildings to add jobs in and near existing neighborhoods, emulating just the sprawling boom and bust cycles and landscape of Houston and Phoenix is not only just poor planning, it's also poor economics, because we have investments in existing areas, investments that we really need to leverage. And our traditional downtowns throughout this region, whether it's the historic downtown of Forest Grove or the waterfront districts in Oregon City and Lake Oswego, those can all be revitalized as havens for the small businesses and the entrepreneurs that really do fuel this economy here in the region. There's no question we need Nike, we need Intel, we need their thousands of jobs. But we also need Technical Fabricators Incorporated, which has 35 jobs in downtown Gresham, and all the other sorts of companies like that like settings like that. We need the McMiniman brothers. They've restored dilapidated buildings from Troutdale to Forest Grove and are revitalizing those business cores. Because the economics are that even as the large corporations are laying off workers by the hundreds, small, agile firms are actually growing in many instances. Look again at Gresham's Main Street. With that, it's a revitalized downtown, it's a healthy business climate, it's an identifiable sense of place, and it's good business. Because while the strip malls in that area are reporting a vacancy rate now of between 20 and 30%, every storefront and office on historic Main Street Gresham is full, and it's open for business. Because it's the kind of distinctive place that people are looking for these days. And that sort of revitalization can really be recreated across this whole region in areas that are already inside the urban growth boundary. So that's why this year at the Metro Council we've convened a team of architects and developers and local leaders to revitalize those economic centers. And in Milwaukee, for example, we're working with the city government there on plans to rehabilitate the site of an old Safeway store into a mixture of housing, retail, and other commercial use. And in Gresham Civic Neighborhood, we're teamed up with TriMet, the City of Gresham, the school districts, and private developers to create a mixed-use center with more than 1,000 units of housing, 1 million square feet of retail and office space, a light rail station, and a high school installation. That will attract more than $250 million in private investment, and it creates a great place. These are projects that really embody the spirit of Metro. The spirit of Metro, the place, not just Metro, the agency, but both. It's a spirit that's innovative, it preserves the soul of our communities, and it holds back that ever-present threat of ill-conceived sprawl. Final plank of Metro's economic platform is about transportation, something that makes this community go. We've been working with a group of business leaders, led by Port President Jay Waldron, to fashion a realistic transportation investment package. And this fall, we'll also be awarding $53 million in federal transportation funds. Now, in the past, sometimes those awards were made with mysterious political rhyme and not a whole lot of reason. But this time, thanks in large part to the visionary leadership of Councilor Rex Burkholder, we're going to make those awards strategically with a real emphasis on economic impact, on job retention, and on community development. Again, I can use an example from Gresham. There's Civic Drive. It's a street that now connects a bustling new shopping and school area with existing neighborhoods. And those are the sorts of projects that we need to be supporting. We also will be looking to invest in road projects that unlock the freight and manufacturing operations that keep trade, international and domestic trade, moving. That's the economic agenda, supporting tourism, finding more industrial lands, focusing our transportation dollars, revitalizing our main streets. Those are all fundamental to our mission. And now we're uniquely positioned to ensure that this recovery is guided by a vision and by principles that have served this region well for 25 years. And part of that vision is shaded green, because economic prosperity is very unlikely if we sacrifice our most critical competitive advantage, and that's our high quality of life. It's a tangible economic asset, particularly now in a knowledge-based economy of the 21st century, where entrepreneurs are going to locate their businesses. They can base themselves wherever they want to be. They could be in Austin, Texas. They could be in Boston, Massachusetts. They could be in San Jose. Those are the sorts of tycoons of the future, and they want to be in a place that's got vibrant, interesting neighborhoods. They want to have cultural life, and they want to have access to nature nearby. They don't want a drizzly, wet replica of the California or Phoenix that they are trying to escape from. I recently had breakfast with a venture capitalist who's had several successful businesses here, and I asked him, what makes the Portland region a good place for you to start your business and have your business? And he was smiling, but he was not joking when he answered in all sincerity, it's the hiking. He didn't talk about workers' comp rates or electric rates or the other things that people might have talked about 20 years ago. He talked about his employees' ability to go hiking when work is over. Now, Portland has an old tradition of preserving greenery in the city in the early 20th century. Neighborhoods like Selwood, Laurelhurst, Northwest, Mount Tabor, all of them set aside the parklands which today make those very neighborhoods so valuable. But a strange thing happened in this region. In fact, a strange thing happened in this whole country during developments of the 50s and 60s and 70s, right up to recent years. And as architectural critic James Howard Kunstler might have said, our urban and suburban developments of the second half of the 20th century had a little bit of amnesia to them was, oh, we forgot the parks. Backyards are great, but they aren't substitute for those parks. So with the generous backing of the voters, and 62% of the voters said yes to this in 1995, Metro has ridden in to the rescue with a successful green spaces acquisition effort, something we're very proud of. And as a result, you now own some tremendously beautiful places all over this region. Cooper Mountain, adjacent to Beaverton, rises 700 feet off the floor of the Tualatin Valley, offers breathtaking views out to the Coast Range and south to the Chehalem Mountains. Kanema Bluff, just south of Oregon City, it crowns those bluffs just south of Oregon City along the Willamette. You own 5 beautiful sites along the Tualatin River. The Tualatin River previously was nearly inaccessible, largely ignored by the burgeoning subdivisions that have come to crowd its banks. The Metro Green Spaces program that has achieved those things has been a partnership of local governments and nonprofit groups. And there are examples all over the map of that as well. In Beaverton, for example, there's neighborhood activists Roy Dancer, Jack Franklin, and Dick Scouten, who's now a county commissioner himself. They led the drive to preserve 22 acres adjacent to the Tualatin Hills Nature Park. And by enlisting Metro's help, along with the city of Beaverton, along with the local parks district, along with the Friends Group, these neighborhood leaders, they were able to create a park that was bigger than any one entity could have possibly created or achieved working on its own. So we've redeemed a lot of promises in that area, the promises that were made to the voters in 1995. At that time, in fact, the promise was made that Metro would acquire 6,000 acres, and we have kept that promise and trumped it actually by 2,000 acres. I'm proud to say Metro's acquired 8,000 acres. But now I think it will also soon be time to redeem the larger and unspoken promise that those lands really do represent, and I do think they talk to us. The promise that those lands speak to us about is that parks need to be available to people, that you can enjoy and use what it is that you've purchased. Thanks to the Green Ribbon Committee, which consists of local officials, business people, and environmentalists, we already have a pretty good idea of what needs to be done to open those lands up to the public. So they told us it's wonderful to have that public land along the Tualatin River, but the sites really need picnic tables, they need signs, they need access, they need launching docks for the canoes. It's great to have preserved those views from Cooper Mountain. Now we just need the trails so we can get up there and actually enjoy the view. So I say it's now time to reconvene that Green Ribbon Committee, put together a detailed plan, including a funding plan, to fully utilize those public lands. 1 year from now, I'd like to be back here with that plan, a plan that will make those lands available to everyone, not just to those of you who are willing to bushwhack through walls of Himalayan blackberry bushes. I am very proud to be the president of the new and improved Metro and serve with the people that I serve with and in the tradition of people who've served there before. Now we have a new council, we have a new manager, we have a new direction, and we have a new understanding of our old and traditional values. Now I know that when we all leave here today, our thoughts are going to immediately turn back to hotspots, global hotspots that actually are pretty far from Metro's borders. And in times like this, I find personally that the best comfort there can be is to focus on the things that you can do. Step up and do what you can do where you are. That to me is the most important thing at times like this. Now, Metro can't solve Oregon's schools crisis, and we can't resolve the state budget crisis. But there are things that we can do and that we are doing. We can and we will stake our claim to be a driver in the economic recovery. And we can and we will protect the lasting natural legacy that distinguishes this region. We can and we will finally claim Metro's rightful mantle as an innovative and responsive elected regional government. Ultimately, we can and we will help our home achieve that promise that we all feel very deeply here. So as you leave, let's continue. Keep that promise in mind and the values that make this region home. Thank you.
I continue to think that the place to be on Friday at lunchtime is here at City Club's Friday Forums, and David gave us a good reason to continue feeling that way. I would like to ask David lots of questions. I farmed in Washington County for quite some time, my family for over 60 years, and I know that we just recently, yesterday LCDC approved 1,900 acres, I believe, to sort of fast track for industrial lands. And I heard the applause in this room when that was announced. As a farmer, though, and I look at the 203 acres in Washington County that is being taken as industrial land, I have some concerns. Washington County has lost 40% of its farmland since 1960. And a lot of that loss of land went to, in my opinion, industrial sprawl, residential sprawl, land banking, things that really didn't use that land wisely. So, President Bragdon, my question is, what plans do you have to see that the additional lands that are being taken from the ag industry to be used by other industries, how do we know they're going to be used wisely, more wisely than they have been?
Thanks, Marcus. It's a great question, one that we really wrestled with quite a bit last year, because it's a tough choice, and our jobs do involve a lot of choices between different competing imperatives that I think we all agree with. It's the nature of the land use system. There's a whole series of goals. Nobody disagrees with any one of them in terms of, yeah, we want to have a strong high-tech industry. Yeah, we'd like to have a strong farming industry. Where we sit, we're sometimes in the position of actually carrying out and weighing those things. In the case of the land around Hillsborough that we voted to bring in specifically for industry, one of the ways that we tried to condition that to address exactly Marcus's point was to put conditions to make sure that it is going to be used for that high priority industrial use that everybody agrees it needs to be on that type of parcel. So as part of our action in bringing it into the urban growth boundary, we specified that the zoning on it needs to be for large lot industrial manufacturing purposes that really can't go anywhere else in this region. And if we don't accommodate them, frankly, they're going to Austin, Texas, or they're going someplace else. It was my determination that that was a reasonable trade-off that we needed to make in order to keep those jobs here, but make sure that we're preserving it for those purposes. Because I'm not going to vote to bring something like that in for a Burger King or that sort of thing. But for somebody that's willing to come along with a couple hundred high-paying jobs, that's a good deal for Oregon, I think.
Hi, David.
Chris
Smith, club member. My question is about economic development strategy, and a lot of discussion has been given to the theory of industrial clusters in discussing our region's economic issues. And on the west side, we've identified clusters in semiconductors and footwear and printing and imaging, and the idea that these clusters want to grow together as new companies join kind of the economic ecosystems. And I think you wisely added some land in Hillsborough to allow those clusters to grow. But because of the nature of the land in our region, most of the land you added to the urban growth boundary is out by Damascus. And as that area develops, if it simply develops as bedrooms for industries in other parts of the region, we're not going to meet our transportation goals. So my question is, has any thought been given to how to seed new industrial clusters out near Damascus and make those complete communities?
Very much so. Certainly, I think the approach that we took to the urban growth boundary last year, and this was largely under the leadership of Councilor Rod Park, who's here, was to try to take a more comprehensive view of our growth boundary actions so that we are facilitating the creation of complete communities rather than just taking a slice of sort of schlocky stuff all the way around the entire urban growth boundary, but to bring in parcels that made enough sense that communities could develop there a little more holistically. So in the case of the Damascus area, certainly the local jurisdiction, and Commissioner Jordan was very involved in this, did start to develop some concept that would involve economic growth because they're certainly disadvantaged in a fiscal sense. Clackamas County in that area, very disadvantaged in a fiscal sense by an over-reliance on residential property and the consequent need for their citizens to travel far to work. So in our action, we did bring in areas specifically for industry that would provide for some job growth in that area.
I guess my question is not so much have we created the conditions in which those things could occur, but have we attempted to target specific clusters that we might try and grow as opposed to just letting them happen?
Well, my own personal philosophy about it is that when government gets into the business of picking winners and losers in particular industries, that's where we often go wrong. You know, that you start subsidizing buggy whip factories or that sort of thing. I think our role is to create the platform where the private market can flourish, and it's hard for me anyway, personally, to say, well, 10 years from now, these are going to be winner industries and these are going to be loser industries. What we are doing certainly is tracking history a little bit in our decision making this coming year in analyzing the appropriate places for industrial development. We've been tracking, and I believe this is the first time that we've been doing this, the commercial building permits and industrial building permit history that gives you some indication of where the marketplace has wanted to go. That's been one of my objectives, is try to get some marketplace thinking into our thinking to give you a sense of what's suitable for expansion.
Thank you.
Hi, David.
Professor.
Tom Dunn, City Club member. It's great to see you here as Metro President. I have a problem with conventions. A few years ago, I tried to get situated in Portland, the national meeting of the American Chemical Society. This is a society, one among several, with large membership, largely populated by bright, creative, relatively young people. I consider that the top of the line type of organization you'd like to have come here as a convention. I was shut off by the national office of ACS because the convention center was marginal. I presume now it's in range for a large meeting. The problem was a lack of hotel rooms. And what can you do about that?
That is the challenge we're going to meet next month is the first challenge that you mentioned, which is the size of the facility itself and the ability. We were running at near capacity in a functional sense that by the time people move in and out one weekend after another, it was very close to capacity, and we are addressing that with the expansion. Now the limiting factor is you're absolutely right. It's the number of hotel rooms, and specifically it's the number of hotel rooms that are proximate to the convention center itself. And so we're working with the Portland Development Commission and the City of Portland on that very challenge. And meetings have been going on just in the past couple of weeks on that to make sure that we're not limiting ourselves to do that. We had a market study done by a group of consultants from the convention trade out of Atlanta who said it's probably a 600 or 700 room facility that's needed. The public policy choice that's difficult and that we're going to have to weigh is not doing anything that subsidizes a newcomer to the industry at the disadvantage of hotels who are already here, who have private shareholders and who've made investments and don't deserve to be undercut by a subsidy to somebody new coming along. So we need to fashion a way to make sure that the new hotel would bring marginal new business here that's going to benefit everybody else. So we're looking at different financing tools. That PDC does have taxing increment financing in that area. That's one possibility, but I think working with the industry is going to be really critical, because the industry is the one who funded the building, and we don't want to undercut them. Yes, sir.
Hi, David. Adam Van Loon, City Club member. Metro is obviously having a good impact on the region, and you mentioned the national attention that it's received. I'm wondering, have any other cities or states or counties come to Metro with advice in setting up their own regional governments?
We actually have quite a few calls and visits from people. We've had people from Chattanooga and San Diego and Indianapolis who come here, and we get inquiries from them quite a bit. And what I tell them is every part of the country is different. Every place has its own distinctive characteristics, and what works in Pittsburgh may not work in Portland. What works in Portland may not work in Pittsburgh, and that they have to adapt things to their own circumstances. But we definitely do get a lot of that sort of interest. I'd say, just as a plug too, Portland State University has an Institute of Metropolitan Studies that's doing some real pioneering work on sort of the concepts of regionalism and what works, right here, and they get consulted about this a lot too. This is what I've been waiting for when I was.
Well, I am trying not to delude you.
I remember I remember both of us testifying at TriMet board meetings in the 1970s, and
A long time.
Here we still are.
Indeed. and I hope we can continue to do that.
Me too.
Ray Polani, City Club member. To ensure a livable future, I think regional rail transportation must move quickly a lot of people to and through downtown. For capacity and speed, it will be essential to build under the congested streets of downtown and under the Willamette. Will Metro commit to move light rail underground through downtown to serve the region and downtown?
In thinking about, there was one question I knew I would get. That's because it's a very good one, and I think ultimately in the long run that is the solution when you look at Edmonton or other systems in terms of where they reach the capacity that they have to go underground. We're not at that stage yet in terms of either the capacity of the existing line or the capital capacity of the region to afford it. So I'm not in a position to commit that that we'd be able to do that. What we are looking at right now is if the 205 line gets built and the Milwaukee line gets built, what does that do to the downtown routing? How do you match that up with the need to reconstruct the transit mall, which needs to be done regardless of what happens with light rail, and try to make the best investments that we can with the money that's likely to be available. I don't think the money is going to be available to go underground. I think that's unfortunate, but needs to be evaluated. I have to say the last numbers that I saw were pretty steep. Gretchen, Commissioner Kafori.
No, ex-commissioner.
Ex-commissioner.
I'm going to be like Ray Polani and I'll just stand here and you'll know what the question is. but my
I'm glad
question.
you asked about affordable housing.
Thank you. I just brought along a copy of a report that we worked on at Metro as I was phasing out of my public life, and I think in terms of promises kept and economic development, we need places for these workers and titans of industry to live. So I'd like your thoughts about affordable housing and how it fits in Metro's agenda for this year, legislative and otherwise.
Thanks. It's a good question. The affordability, and to me, that is a regional issue that is typically been approached in more of a patchwork way, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. I think we have come a long way in the past several years in terms of building a regional will and consensus around that. And I think a really telling achievement is that there are local leaders throughout the region who are now committed to this. Mayor Becker in Gresham, Mayor Drake in Beaverton, they both lobbied quite extensively at the last session of the legislature with our support too, and Metro's was part of that coalition to provide funding for affordable housing. Chair Bryan in Washington County, this is something he is working on as well, and I think these are all really important breakthroughs. In terms of this particular session, we are going to be discussing our agenda next Thursday. I talked with Commissioner Sten about this. I think we're very likely to support the same bill that we supported with Beaverton and Gresham and Portland and the other cities to end the preemption on the transfer tax. That was our position in the last session. Most of the councilors who had that position, I can't speak for the other six, only because several of them are in the room, but if they weren't here, I'd feel better speaking for them. But most of us who endorsed that position last session are still on the council, and I think we're likely to support that again in our legislative roundup next week as well, and that we would be down there adding our voice with Eric and those other mayors that I've mentioned, because I think it is a regional issue. And I think the important thing, to go loop back to my initial remarks, what makes it regional is that you have leaders at the local level who are recognizing it, and it's not just coming from us. Sir?
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Tedesco. I'm a City Club member. And I have another question about UGB. Traditionally and historically, the UGB expansions have been primarily controlled by the quality of the farmland for expansion. And the system has not been very responsive to planning needs. And I was wondering about your and the council's vision for this in the future, if this will be the case going forward, or if there's a desire to make the system more flexible.
I think, and again, I can probably speak for myself more than going out too far on a limb for the other six, but certainly I think you're right. In terms of what the criteria have been for where urban growth boundaries get expanded, that is a creature of state law. So revisiting that, and I think some revisiting of that is actually appropriate, needs to include the state, because they're the ones who make these rules. And I know that the new administration in Salem, I know that they're interested in looking at some of those questions as well, because you're right, the guidelines as they're written now are based almost entirely on protecting what's outside the urban growth boundary, which is a valid goal, but in my book should not be the only goal. And in the past, I think that has driven us to make some planning decisions that are based on those external factors rather than on the basis of what's good for the communities inside the urban growth boundary, or for good planning reasons. I would prefer to see us develop some criteria that enable us to look at some of those internal factors as well, so that when we're making those decisions, we say, well, what decision, while we want to minimize the impacts on agriculture or forestry outside, but what are the consequences for decisions on the inside as well? What does it do for cities, whether it's their fiscal situation or their downtown redevelopment, that sort of thing? So I think we've got to be very careful about that. I think that the system, by and large, has served fairly well. I wouldn't go chuck the whole thing out, but I think basing it on the economics of the 1970s is also a bit stale. So I would expect that maybe when the legislature's out of session and things aren't as passionate as they are in Salem, that there'll be people taking a look at this, and Metro will be at that table.
Thank you.
Hi, David. Ted Falk, member. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about recommendations that have been made in past City Club reports, since you're addressing a City Club audience. 10 or 15 years ago, there was a recommendation to merge the 3 Portland area counties into one thing that would be called Cascadia County. Now, setting aside the idea of a tri-county merger, how would the name Cascadia suit you to solve your name problem?
That's good.
The second question is, about 4 years ago, there was a report on density of housing in the Portland area, and the report, one of its conclusions was that not enough was being done to drive high-density housing onto large opportunity parcels, and I wonder if you agree with that assessment and whether you have any role in making that happen.
Sure. On the first one, in terms of county consolidation, my stealth plan is we're just going to keep hiring the county commissioners to come work for us, and before they know it, that's the stealth plan. Did I tell you that, Mike? Yeah. On the second point, that really gets to my point in the presentation with regard to redevelopment of the centers that we already have. Marcus and I were actually on the City Club trip to Vancouver, BC last June, where you see what has been undertaken there. Very, very ambitious, and I think with great results in terms of the building styles and preserving existing neighborhoods while also having density in places where it makes sense. They've had similar situations to what we've had here with the River District and the Pearl District, but I think have been more ambitious in terms of height. And so I think we learned a lot on that trip, and it was inspiring. I'd like to see more of that happen. In terms of Metro's role in it, the local zoning and the development incentives and that sort of thing are local concerns, but I think through the centers team that we have, we're going to be working with them to try to share notes on how those things get done, and I think having the developers on the team and architects is going to help people to be a little more bold with the vision. We're doing some of that note sharing too, Gretchen, by the way, on affordable housing. We in the past, the report that you held up here, which requires the local governments to report what they're doing, I found that that's not so meaningful that somebody types up a report and sends it in to us and we put it in a file cabinet. What we're doing this year instead, for the first time, they're actually going to come to the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, which is their peers in local government, and say, do a show and tell of here's what's working, because you're the one who told me this. There's 19 tools in the toolbox or whatever of federal programs, and so having Tigered hear what Beaverton is doing, I think is really helpful. So it's a similar thing with the centers.
Hi, I'm Susan Pierce. I'm a member, and I'm also here as chair of Hosford Abernathy neighborhood, which is kind of next door to you. You've talked about a lot of things within the region that touch on things that are going on in the inner southeast. You didn't mention the light rail alignment along from Milwaukee to Portland, which we hope stays on the table. Industry and older buildings that we'd like to recycle. We have a vision for what we'd like to see in this inner central southeast. What's yours?
Well,
Your backyard.
Yeah, it is my backyard. I think the revitalization that's gone on in the inner southeast Portland over the last 10 years is a great example of our planning system at work. And I'd like to see that continue and be replicated. I think having that light rail line running through to Milwaukee is going to be an important contribution to that. It's something I certainly do support. It's certainly part of the package that we're moving forward with the business group that I mentioned. Dr. McCall.
Hi, David. What are you ideas that you have on your revenue sharing? Currently before the legislature, have you thought that through thoroughly?
Just for context, he was my teacher in freshman year of high school, and I don't know if I've changed at all, but yes. Have I thought that through? I remember hearing that question before. It's actually something that we want to think through. The question's right on point. It's something that we do want to think through. It's a concept that I think is promising, and Councilor Carl Hostica, who's here, has worked with Senator Decker in Salem to create a task force that would study the idea. And here's the genesis of it, and here's the reason. Since Measure 5 and 47 and 50, and the restrictions on property tax and the how residential properties are capped and some of the commercial and industrial ones are not, or they turn over, the gap between haves and have-nots in this region is busting wider and wider open in terms of the jurisdiction's fiscal capacity. And there are all kinds of anomalies now around the region that are getting worse and worse and worse, just from the point of view of fiscal capacity of the jurisdictions based on old lines in Measures 5 and 47 and 50. The example I would give you is the respective relationship of Cornelius to Hillsborough. I think Hillsborough has been phenomenally successful, and that needs to be celebrated. 56% of their revenue comes off of industrial land. They have no debt. They're a very well-managed municipality. Good services for their citizens. And next door to them is Cornelius, which has virtually no industrial land and has only housing land and relatively low assessments at that. And so their ability to raise revenue, just to pay their police officers and run the fire department and the other basic services, gets crimped year after year after year. So the question that Carl and others have raised, and that there's a model for this in Minnesota, is how do you somehow even that out? It's not a matter of sharing revenue with Metro. That's not which some people have the concept. It's a matter of sharing among the haves and the have-nots, in the sense that there are people who live in Cornelius, obviously, who are enjoying those jobs in Hillsborough. But does that mean they're entitled to less police service or less fire service by virtue of that line? And is there some way to share that? So I think what's likely to happen if we can get this bill passed is that there would be a study group that would include, it would be primarily a local government group, I would presume. That's an interesting sort of fissures around the region because it's not geographic. That you have-nots, Oregon City or Wood Village. I mean, they're geographically dispersed, but they're next to other neighbors who are doing relatively well. So that's the issue there, and so we are going to be studying that, I hope, if the legislature will allow us to do that. But we'll be studying with the local governments who are involved.
That is it for our time. I want to clarify for the listening audience that this freshman year high school history professor is our very own wonderful historian, Kim McCall. Thank you for that question, Kim. And thank you, David Bragdon. City Club is adjourned.